Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Workbench Journal. I just finished up cutting some bushes over the weekend, or I shouldn't say cutting them out of my front yard over the weekend. Involved a sawzall, shears, and of course a chainsaw. Wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that easy either. I still got a lot to clean out, but they're all out for now. Anyway, so no, still not building, of course. And I mean, I'm getting a mild itch, but it's not enough for me to grab something out of a stash or finish up what I got and do what I got to do. It just I look at like, do I really have to? So no, not yet. So in the meantime, I'm actually doing research on on specific subjects since I got a pile here, any future ideas, aftermarket stuff, the normal routine. And one of my favorite subjects happens to be the F4 Phantom. Now, I don't know about most of you guys, unless some of you one of you, a couple of you, or I don't know, a couple of you across the pond would get it. Probably United Kingdom or even Germany or Greece for that matter. The F4 Phantom's a thing. And where I grew up, state of New Jersey, we have two bases, Air Force bases. We got McGuire Air Force Base, and we have one near Atlantic City Airport. They call it Atlantic City Airport. Technically, it's not. It's actually Pomona, and it's actually an Air Force base. It's right next to Atlantic City Airport, or at least somewhere near the vicinity, but it's not at the airport, to my knowledge. But to be fair, I don't go down to Atlantic City that often, so that's because I don't gamble. Now, as for McGuire, I'm somewhat familiar with it because McGuire Air Force Base actually is from an amusement park that I go to, which is Great Adventure, which is right in Jackson, New Jersey, about half hour, 45 minutes. It's a roller coaster amusement park, really cool park. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because McGuire Air Force Base used to fly Phantoms from 1980 up until 1991, and I remember at least 3 or 4 years of those Phantoms flying right over Great Adventure while I was waiting in line for a roller coaster or a ride. And it depends, and depending on how time of day, the altitude and stuff, you can hear them. You can literally hear them roaring across that sky first, and then seeing them. That's a lot of brute force from those J-79 jets. And it was the one I didn't get to see the F4D because they operated that until '85, but I did get to see the F4E, which was until 1991, and it was a sight and an audio thing that just to behold, because it's just so loud, and just seeing them from a distance. I mean, they weren't quite over like a low profile or anything, but when they got low, it was pretty damn impressive. And unfortunately, those days are long gone. And basically the F4 Phantoms were phased out of McGuire Air Force Base. Same year I graduated the 8th grade. So those days were over, and it was a shame. Now, McGuire Air Force Base houses aerial fueling tankers like the KC-135 and the KC-10. And the 108th and the 108th Technical Fighter Wing actually had a squadron in there, the 141st Tactical Fighter Squadron, which flew the F-4 Phantom. And a lot of people assumed they were going to switch to the F-16, but the end of the Cold War changed all that. So, it's ever since then, the New Jersey Air National Guard has been my thing. It's a state pride thing. I know some of you guys have Texas, New York, of course, Florida, and whatever else, but there's just something about my state that I don't know if anybody else is like that in the other states you're in, but in my case, it's a Jersey pride thing. It's a state pride thing. Don't ask why. Anyway, so we'll go back to what I was saying about the research. Now, the reason why I told you this story about the McGuire is because of the model kit, the F4 Phantom. It's a favorite subject of mine, and I do a lot of research. I wanted to make sure when I was going to be building this subject. Matter of fact, I will show you what I've got here, which is, of course, yes, right box art. the classic F4E Phantom kit from Hasegawa. It's generally a very good kit. It was molded in the 80s. It's not a perfect kit, I will tell you that. But it was molded in the 80s, and it was quite a remarkable feat for its time. It's got the slatted wings. It has the parts for the camera on the port side. I think it's got parts for the combat camera, but this one has the slats. And the F4E, most of the production run had slats, or they were retrofitted with them during the time, and it was in Vietnam and so on and so forth. And it's overall a good kit. Cockpit's not that good. That's one of the few things where I'm willing to pay money to put an aftermarket cockpit set on, because even though it's a nice kit, it still has its drawbacks. And you got to keep in mind that you can only do so much with injection molded plastic during that era. So, but that's the extent I'm going. I might go burner cans or photo etch, depends on what kind of mood I'm in, because that kit could benefit from it. Otherwise, it's generally a good kit from beginning to end. It goes together well, very little filling and sanding. All you need is your proper research, which I do a lot of for the subject. And unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to track down. Even though the internet's a big help, it's not that easy to track down. So it's like you got to go to certain sites, or whether it's on Google or Yahoo, or whatever search engine you use. So it's a lot of a hit or miss. But when you get lucky, you get lucky, and there's a treasure trove. And so we'll talk about the research involved. I got books on it. I got detail and scale books from Bert Kinsey. I have Walk Around from Squadron. I have Squadron books. And I also have a book called Colors and Markings of the F4 Phantom, which I have the F4E. And it has a couple of pictures of the aircraft that were stationed at McGuire Air Force Base. It's not enough, but it's a start. And I actually found a whole bunch of pictures online on the internet, saved the pictures so I could use them to look at everything carefully, whether it's active duty, whether they were being transferred to Turkey or Greece, depending on how you look at it, or target drones. And it's an interesting subject, because even though the aircraft is still the same, it was the markings, and it was the camouflage, the markings, but the airframe itself was still standard. It was 68 year. It was the 68 year build. I think most of them were between 66 and 68, so there really wasn't anything special. No modifications, no camera on the port side, known as a TISEO. I don't remember the full acronym for it, or you can call it TISEO, whatever it is. And it didn't have the other modifications like it was for export, like South Korea and the like. It was just standard F4E, but it did have the slats. It did have the long gun fairing. However, some of them didn't have the arrowhead reinforcement on the tails, on the horizontal tails. So you got to check your reference accordingly. And back to the paint job here. And for my research, the F4E was in one of three: Southeast Asia wraparound, European 1, or the Hill Gray scheme, which is similar. The Hill Gray is similar to the F-16, save for a different color or two, or the pattern. And it's interesting because I was doing, and there was a decal sheet available from Speed Hunter Graphics, which has it on here. I'll show you the sheet right here. That's a decal sheet right here. It's got McGuire. Then, of course, the Hasegawa kit, I think the second or third boxing, I don't remember offhand, also has markings for McGuire Air Force Base. So I was doing cartwheels, and I was real happy and stuff. Now, despite all the research and stuff, depending on aircraft to aircraft, it's going to require a lot of looking at the pictures. And sometimes when you're doing that, it can be a real pain in the ass, especially when you're, itchy nose. Especially when you're trying to get little details here and there. And it's interesting because depending on the era and the aircraft that you want to depict, it's going to be different from jet to jet. And I mean, before they phased out the Phantom, which they were all finally consistent the same. Most of the time, most of the time it was, it was before they finally got all the aircraft in the Hill Gray scheme. It was either European 1 or the Southeast Asia wraparound. And most of the Southeast Asia wraparound tends, like the marking and stuff, tends to be the same way on the European one. So, and depending, give or take. And this is where research is involved. Sometimes the decals are incorrect. Sometimes it's a different subject you got to do. Sometimes everything else is correct, but it's the colors that are from the actual decals that are questionable, or the size of the lettering, the numbers. A good example would definitely be the speed hunter graphics. Now, I don't know if these are 100% accurate or not, because from everything I can remember, depending on the color scheme, most of the F4Es in European 1 and McGuire had a red tail band. I don't know about the orange, unless it was a one-off, which is right here, because if you look at the Hasegawa, right here, it's red. As you can tell, most of the time maybe it was just a one-off when they were doing a training exercise or what. But it talks about it on here, so who knows. Then, of course, there's the Hill 1 or Hill 2 scheme, which is talked about here. Not that one, but the one above. Now, it looks like, if you've been to McGuire and you see the nose itself, you actually notice the aircraft itself right here, gunship gray, and it was European gray for the outline, which is generally correct. And when they were at the time at McGuire, depending on where, they also had it without the gunship gray. But the markings, to an extent, were true. Were actually darker gray than the actual airframe, depending. And for some reason, like I said, I don't know if Speed Hunter messed up, or not Speed Hunter. The inks were messed up, or it's just the color of the. Who knows? But the tiger heads don't look right. This actually looks more realistic to me, because this is for European 1. But for the Hill Gray, I don't know. And the lettering seems a little too dark for me. Who knows? Maybe they got, who knows, maybe more research. But that's just not it, just not the decals. There's also the camouflage scheme. Believe it or not, a lot of not a lot of model manufacturers, a couple of them got the color pattern wrong. The European 1 is basically the same as Southeast. Just replace the tan with a dark gray. Well, they mixed up the pattern. Hasegawa was known for this one in their instructions. They messed up the pattern on it, believe it or not. And fortunately, it's correct in Speed Hunter. I also think in Afterburner, if you can find them, depending. And what else? Yeah, sorry guys. But more or less, they actually got it corrected. But for a while, people had them mixed up. And they thought it was one, they thought it was the other. Now, we were wrong. But as I was saying about the decals, the colors, the markings, it's more than just that. It's also the research involved. Like I said, depending on what airframe you're doing. Like a generic F4E with slats, that's not a big deal. All you have to use is just certain antennas, certain pieces. You don't have to add them on. But if you're working on, with the Speed Hunter graphics case, if you're working on there it is, like a later year Phantom, like 72 to 74, like this one here, there's certain modifications. And if you look at the photos, they're actually true. Like George Air Force Base had later year, like 72 to 74, later year Phantoms. And they had a lot of modification as compared to back like 66, 67, 68, even 1970. There was a lot of modifications over the years, and the F4 Phantom got a lot of updates throughout its life, much like the F-16 has, and aircraft during World War II. So it all depends on what you're doing. The other thing is, even when you're doing the research, it isn't just to that. Sometimes the decal manufacturers get it wrong. Sometimes model manufacturers get it wrong. So you got to get corrections and stuff. Another good example of doing the homework is the A6 Intruder. Now, I got 3 A6 Intruder kits. I got the oldie but goodie Rebel kit, I have the Kinetic kit, and then I have the all-out Hobby Boss kit, which is basically a shrunk-down version of the 1/32 scale, well-done trumpeter kit. And it's weird because I actually have 3 different sets of markings for the squadron that I want to depict because of my older brothers, USS Coral Sea, the Hornet, so on and so forth. And I actually have 3 different sets of markings. I have a sheet from Scale, which is rather half-assed, which is right over here. And if you notice, it's questionable. I mean, everything else, this seems to be okay, this seems to be okay, the numbers seem to be okay, head motif, but everything else, it's kind of a it's really not that great. But to be fair, Scale didn't give you the whole sheet. They expected you to augment like a kit sheet or from the model kit you're using and whatnot. But overall, it ain't half bad. And then, of course, I got Super Scale sheet. Super Scale is hit or miss also, but they're more hit than miss. And even though they got the markings throughout here for the VA-55 War Horses, there's actually 2 different kinds, by the way. I did the research, and it's generally true. They actually had this, one of the horses had. Problem is with these is they're overall, I think, gunship gray or dull gray. It's one of the 2. I gotta do a dot next to it to see what it is. I mean, overall, I've seen the markings for like in some photos, and generally they are true, but they're also incomplete. Like they forgot to add the 5. Usually, A6 intruder squadrons, when they were on the carrier, was usually given a 5 and a 6, like 500, 501, and 600, 601, and so forth. It's not like 1 or 2, which is the F-14, 3, 4, I believe, were the Hornets, and 5 and 6 were the intruders. Before the Hornets, it was the A7, so they also got the 3 and 400 series. And generally, as a whole, though, they're very good. Then, of course, you got the latest which is Angle of Attack. Here's the latest one, which has everything. They did the research from the photos, and they speculated the best they could. But they got it pretty close, and they were very, very close. The other problem, once again, I shouldn't say the other problem. Actually, it is a problem. The other thing, looking into it when you're doing research, it's the camouflage itself, or the tactical paint scheme, as the Marines and Navy designated it as. Even though it used 3, sometimes it was 3 grays, but most of the time it was 2 grays. Sometimes it was 1. In case in point with the intruder or any naval aircraft in general, even if it's freshly painted, it's hard to tell where the demarcation lines for the paint scheme is. And even then, these, over the years, corrosion control, repaints, fading from the sun, it makes for an interesting mishmash of colors. So the research can be a pain. It can be really, really difficult, especially when you're trying to get everything together for a specific subject. And it could be, I don't know if auto builders, like model car makers, have this trouble, or you got an advantage, so you don't have to worry about that so much. I know sci-fi, depending on what you got to depict, I know it could be a pain in the ass for you guys, especially if you don't have a book on it. But the advantage is you can always freeze frame video from like a DVD or something, or the internet. You guys got lucky. Same thing with model shipbuilding. But research can be really difficult. Now, this is just from my experience, and it can be really, really difficult, especially on what you're doing. When I do World War II Pacific, when I'm doing like the Zero and stuff, finding everything else is fine, but the colors is a nightmare. It's like stepping on a minefield. Sometimes, or it's like playing the roulette wheel at Atlantic City, speaking of which. And it's like trying to run a roulette wheel, red or black, and you don't even know the numbers. The colors are difficult. You can only speculate. And if it looks right, you get lucky. And it can be tough. And if you don't get everything right, you can get criticized. You can get hammered for it. Or it just doesn't look right. And like you said, with Phantom and the Intruder, they're going to be relatively tough to do the research on. And hopefully I get everything right once I start getting everything rolling. But, the bottom line is research is important. It's very important. It's what helps you in building a better, or modeling a better model or a better subject, especially with the specific subject you want to build, or how you got to go about things. And it's more than just paint and decals. It's a lot of research. And I'm rest assured, I know some of you experienced model builders, you got the same trouble. So it's more than just, it's also colors, it's accuracy of the kit itself, it's what you got to do to modify it. It's tough, man. But I think to keep it from losing the fun aspect of it or just enjoying it is just don't take it seriously. If it is still your model, if you're not sure about it, you can add it, you can omit it. Just take your time. Ultimately it's up to you when you're doing the research. And even then, a good rule of thumb, being from my trade or even carpentry, always measure twice, cut once. Always double check to make sure you get everything right before you commit and go ahead. So, this is all I have for now. Happy modeling. Happy Memorial Day, everybody. Take it easy, guys, and hopefully I will talk to you again soon. Have fun.